sees Pat, Liddy and myself slightly, how's my mileage, about 1.5 miles north of the Liffey, on a particularly busy thoroughfare, and we're standing outside a famous, or shall we say infamous, hostelry. Pat, where are we today and where will we be going?
Today we're in inner suburbia. We're in Drumcondra. And we are going to, first of all, have a look at the history of Drumcondra Road as well. Then we're going to move up Church Avenue, have a look at a very special graveyard, have a look at some of the big houses around here. So we have a few things to look at today that are of great interest, I think. But I'll start, first of all, with Drumcondra itself. Drumcondra was just a little village in the 17th, 18th century. The area was called, in fact, Clonturk.
Oh, really?
Yes. There's a house here still called Clonturk House. Now, Clonturk is a corruption of Clontarf. Now, Clontarf in Dublin is a direct descendant of the word, if you like, Clontarf. Means the meadow of the bull. But this
which I think is their symbol, or the coat of arms. There is a bull, I think, on it.
That's right, on their coat of arms. And here could have been equally called Clontarf, but it ended up being called after the village Drumcondra, which means the Drumcondra, or the ridge of Conrock, whoever he was.
Right.
But obviously the ridge encouraged the building of the road here in the early days. Now this road, Drumcondra Road as we know it today, is actually, if you like, based on top of one of Europe's oldest roads, the Sliabh Lucra, which was one of the 5 Celtic highways built about the 2nd century BC, thus predating the Roman roads by several centuries. The Celts paved these roads sometimes in stone, as in Stony Batter, the Stony Bower.
Right, okay.
That's another one of those famous old roads, and we may do that in a programme someday.
Not?
And they continued the roads on using logs and other firm material, and the roads had to be wide enough to permit the passage of 2 chariots. So these were
when you think of those terms, isn't it? Chariot.
Chariots. But the Drumcondra Road as we know it today, of course, it didn't start off being an important highway to the north of Ireland. It was Finglas Road, or going through Finglas and Ashbourne, Duleek. That was the main road to the north at one point.
Is that because the land still had to be reclaimed from the sea, or is there any particular reason for that?
Not really. It's just the way land owning evolved, if you like, and the roads were to serve properties and houses and what have you. And this would have been quite close to the sea, but around here didn't have to be claimed. It's quite high. Now, the Dorset Street at one time only came as far as the Bethsaida Chapel. Now, there are a lot of waxen figures today in the old Bethsaida Chapel, because today that is the Wax Museum.
Ah, I see. Which used to be the Plaza Cinema, or am I thinking of somewhere else?
No, the Plaza, it has many lives. It started off as this chapel, was bought then and turned into a cinema, and then in turn turned into the Wax Museum, and of course its future is a bit uncertain at the moment.
Yes, indeed, okay.
And then from Dorset Street you had Dorset Lane, which came as far as the canal, and then you had Drumcondra Lane, which came as far as the Tolka. And then in front of us here was Santry Lane.
Right, okay.
Or Santry Road. And Santry Road today is much further out. This is now Upper Drumcondra Road. It became a mail coach road in the 18th century. And became the, if you like, the way, the important route to the north, not just to Northern Ireland, but to north of Dublin and so forth.
Yeah.
And the mail coaches, they had to know their distance, and there were milestones put down along this road every so many miles. Now, I don't know if there's any milestone. Maybe a listener could tell us if there's any milestone left on Drumcondra Road. I walked up and down and couldn't find one. But I know there's still some left on the Malahide Road. And these milestones gave you the mileage from the GPO, the General Post Office.
There was one up the road from where I grew up in Ballybowden, and it's still there. It's saying GPO 3 miles.
Well, part of the reason, of course, was to charge tolls on these roads. So many miles, so many pennies. Now, the hostelry, or the famous institution you mentioned there a few moments, the Cat and Cage. Well, of course, there has been a pub there for, since 1690 anyway, the first licence was handed out. I don't think it was called a Cat and Cage then. They have a sign in the window.
I'd imagine not.
No, I don't think so. They have a sign in the window saying established 1750. So it's a bit younger than 1690.
Sure.
But it was a mail coach stop. And as such, it's one of the oldest mail coach pubs still left in the country. Now, you see, the road was extremely unsafe once you left Drumcondra. Once you got
Because
to
of
the
thieves
centre,
and
thieves
highwaymen?
and highwaymen, and there are many instances in the 18th century newspapers. If you thumb through the newspapers, you see the various people that were held up at the time. There was one incident where everybody was ushered out of their coach and they were personally robbed, as well as the whatever money was being carried.
Yeah.
But there was a priest among them, and he was handed back his purse. So they were decent robbers.
With a conscience.
Robbers with a conscience, indeed. So I think we should turn from here and go up Church Avenue now.
Now we've come up Church Lane, and we have actually found the church, and we're inside the walls of an ancient graveyard, very attractive Church of Ireland. Pat, we've come up to Drumcondra Church.
Well, we have. We came up, as I say, Church Avenue. That's the road that Bertie Ahern, our current Taoiseach,
our esteemed perhaps not so in some people's views,
where he was raised. And there's no plaque on his house yet, but I'm sure that'll come in time. And nor is he yet buried in here, but I think he could do worse. Although this is a very ancient graveyard.
It certainly looks
around
the
the
feel
church.
of it, all right.
It's a medieval graveyard, in fact. You won't see any medieval tombstones or whatnot, but it's in use since medieval days, late medieval days. And it's currently in use, but only for people, if you like, who are already have a plot in here. Now, I'm going to draw, we'll walk around this graveyard, because not all of Dublin's famous people are buried in Glasnevin Cemetery or in Mount Jerome or Hallows, Hallows Cross.
Yeah.
There are some surprises you're going to discover here.
Right.
And the first one mentioned on the wall over here, will we move over to it and read the plaque? Now,
as we approach it, there's a lot of tablets leaning against the wall, I suppose about 3.5, 4 feet tall. And as we read out the one, it says, "We'll sing a song, a soldier's song, sacred to the memory of Patrick Heaney."
Patrick Heaney is the composer of our national anthem. Right. Patrick Heaney actually wrote the poem, if you like, or the words, the lyrics to the anthem. But the music was written and published, well, it wasn't published till 1912. And poor Patrick Heaney, who wrote the music, he died 1 year before the actual score, if you like to put it like that, was published and performed. But he's actually the composer of the national anthem. And
tucked away here in, a quiet little place in Drumcondra.
Yes, we don't actually know which part of the cemetery he's buried in, so that's why you just have this tablet on the wall here. But we do know where the next person is buried, very famous person.
Now we've moved a little bit further down in Drumcondra Cemetery, and we're standing beside what can only be described as it's been in better condition, but it's a broken gravestone of one George Semple.
George Semple was one of the great architects of Dublin.
Really?
Now, this is a graveyard of architects, as we will discover. George is the chap who put the steeple on top of St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he also, in his varied functions, he built Essex Bridge, which is the bridge at the bottom of Capel Street. It's called Grattan Bridge.
Grattan Bridge, I was going to say, yeah.
That's right, yeah. In his day, it was called Essex Bridge. And he built St. Patrick's Hospital. When Dean Swift died, he left money for a hospital for lunatics, as it was called in those days.
Back then, yeah.
And with those funds and other funds, that hospital was built, and he was the architect. And he's lying here in this peculiar-looking arrangement of a rounded off with brick and cement on the top. At a tomb, yeah. Yeah, it would be a tomb. I don't know if there are other members of his family in here, whether he's there in his own or not, but we wouldn't know he was buried there except for this broken headstone.
And even that's hard to read.
And it's impossible to read. I just barely made out Semple, but then I knew that was the location.
Inside the walls of the church, sadly, because of the security these days, all wired up and crossed over to the grave of Captain Francis Groves. But somebody who's much more famous, in my mind anyway, is also interred here. Who's that?
James Gandon, Dublin's most illustrious architect. Groves and himself were good friends. There's a good few years age difference between them, but they were chums in life and they're chums in death. Now, Groves himself, in his day, was a famous man. He was called Captain Francis Groves. He was a captain in the Surrey militia. Surrey militia, and he didn't like the military life, and he became a historian or an antiquarian, as they like to call themselves. And he wrote two quite famous books in the 18th century on Irish antiquarians, in other words, the heritage of Ireland. And that was published, the 2 volumes were published in 1791, and unfortunately Gross himself died the same year. Gandon was very upset about that. I think 1791 was the same year the Custom House was built or opened or whatever.
Of course, Gandon is and will ever be famous for that. Other buildings, I'm trying to rack my brain. One is the home of Charles J. Haughey, or at least is designed in the same way as Gandon used to design. What else did he design?
The forecourts. He designed the forecourts earlier than the Custom House, and the forecourts were almost a consolation prize because he didn't get the City Hall commission.
Which we read a few weeks ago.
That's right, he got second in the competition. And of course King's Inns.
Yes, of course, absolutely.
They would be his main buildings, but he did a number of agricultural buildings around the country and what have you, and private houses.
In the life of Irish architecture, is he number one?
Oh, he would be. Yeah, he would be. There's no question about it. I mean, the Custom House is not just a very fine building, but there were so many innovations in the building of the Custom House that people from all over the world, architects and engineers from all over the world, came to see how it was being done. But that's another story, of course. Now, when poor old Gandon was being buried here, they had to, of course, excavate the grave.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
And in so doing, when the gravediggers' attention was elsewhere, before the arrival, of course, of the remains of Gandon, this mighty slab, I don't know what it weighs, but it fell into the opening and crushed the coffin of poor old Gross and crushed his skull as well.
Oh my God! It's probably made of. It's slate, or it's not as heavy than slate.
I'd say it's probably limestone. It's just one big heavy sheet of limestone.
So it's 7 foot by
2 tons.
3 foot by a foot.
Yeah, it's about 6 inches. I suppose it's about 6 inches thick or 5 inches thick. We're still talking inches here, Declan. It's easier for me.
I think that'll go for a while too.
Definitely nearly 7 feet.
But I wouldn't like to lift it.
No. But what I find, while there's a plaque also to Gandon inside in the church, which is not really visible to us, I think for such an illustrious and important architect, not only of individual buildings in Dublin, but just of the streetscape of Dublin, if you like, this isn't good enough.
I would have to say, because I had to look twice to make out the name James Gandon. There have been some attempts I can see by people to scrape away where it is there, but it's not really a fair testament.
It's not. The very least that they could do is hire another sculptor and engraver to come along and dig out the lettering again. But I think he needs something a little bit more significant, and our society should recognise him better than we do.
Moving away from the wonderful cemetery, we've come round, I think it's onto one of the local roads, and Ormond Road, thank you very much. And we're standing at what looks very impressive, I presume it's seen better days, is what you mentioned earlier on, Clonturk House.
Clonturk House was one of several big houses, as they used to call them, when Drumcondra was very fashionable. Now, please don't write in, it's still fashionable.
When it was more fashionable.
When it was more fashionable. And the house itself now belongs to the Rossmini fathers. It's part of their school for the blind, and they've a big, off Grace Park Road, which we'll see in a few minutes, they've a big setup over there. But what's interesting about this house, at one stage this Frenchman called Duval, at the beginning of the 19th century, opened pleasure gardens here and a curative spa. It was said to contain irons in the water.
Minerals and what have you.
Yes, well, all those minerals came from the iron, the thrown away items he had found in his land. He threw them all to the bottom of the well. They all corroded.
And there was some benefit.
And then he had the benefit. But he knew that. He was a charlatan. But what's even more interesting is the builder, in fact, who erected the new O'Connell Bridge, the original bridge built by James Gandon, was Carlisle Bridge. It wasn't wide enough, so they widened it in exactly the same style, but it made it much wider. But they demolished the old bridge, and the old balustrades and the tops of the balustrades were taken from there. The builder lived in this house, and he erected them in the front of his house here.
The cheek of him.
So if you like, yes, we've a little bit of stealing here in front of us.
So the balustrades you see on Ormond Avenue or Road in Drumcondra, in front of the Clonturk House, were originally the sides of, not Sackville Bridge,
of the old Carlisle
Bridge.
That's right, which you'll often see in photographs, because it was in the 1880s that the O'Connell Bridge we know today, that it was built. They're not all the original, because the ones painted a kind of a reddish colour are metal, and they're replacements.
Presumably they will be painted in time.
But the old stone ones, and they're carved stone, you see, they're not you know,
They're
like
not
poured concrete.
precast,
They're
yeah.
not precast. And they're beginning to show a little bit worse for the wear.
Yeah.
But that's just a little aside. You come up a road and you wouldn't just notice things like that.
That's fantastic.
So I'm going to take you now to Grace Park Road.
It's well named Hidden Dublin, Pat, because this is a part that I've never been to again, I'm sorry to say. But we've just sneaked inside for a quick look inside the gates of All Hallows College off Grace Park Road. And we're seeing a bit of a mix and match of architectural, but tell us what we're looking at.
Well, first of all, coming in off Grace Park Road, we passed St. Joseph's School for the Visually Impaired. That was where Drumcondra Castle stood. It was built in 1560. Now, there's no sign of it now, except an echo of castellation in one of the buildings.
Right, okay.
So opposite that, we've turned into All Hallows College. Now, around 1725, the Coghill family, who were living in Dublin, and first lived where St. Patrick's College, Drumcondra, where we started from, now is, they lived in a house there, and they came. And Sir Edward Lovett Pearce, the man who built the Irish House of Parliament, which is now the Bank of Ireland,
yes.
College Green, he built this magnificent, very classical fronted house.
Looks superb.
Oh, it's a superb house. Now, this guy, Marmaduke Coghill.
From Tipperary, obviously, originally.
He was, in some ways, he was a very well-placed person. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer of Ireland, and he was also a judge, you're probably a jugs too, a judge of the Prerogative Court. And he's very famous for saying that he found it quite justified for men to beat their women with a switch, which is a whip.
Wow.
To occasionally chastise them and keep them in order. Now,
well, they were the days. We won't necessarily echo that.
We won't echo that, nor did his girlfriend, who promptly upped and went, and he died unmarried of gout.
Is it any wonder?
Is it any wonder? But the church that in the cemetery that we visited
yes.
was built by his sister in memory of Marmaduke.
Oh, excellent. So that's the central thing. That's the thing that catches your eye immediately. And as I said, it's a very classical portico. Then the surrounding buildings, all presumably part of the college today.
Yeah, All Hallows College, named after the All Hallows Priory, which is now Trinity College. The lands here belong to All Hallows Priory. But in 1842, the Vincentian priests under Father John Hand set up a missionary college here. And from here, where 8,000 Irish priests have been sent out to English-speaking countries. Sorry, 4,000.
4,000.
The reason I'm thinking of 8 is there are still 800 priests alive today in the various missionary fields who were trained here in All Hallows. But now, alas, the seminary, I think, is virtually closed now.
I know that they had a lot of problem in Maynooth and in St. Patrick's College as well, and I probably hear of the seminarians and the lack of the new blood coming in. But there are people here today who are still training.
Well, it's a college now for diplomas, primary degrees, postgraduate courses in theology, philosophy, media studies, and so forth. So it's still a very vibrant, and they, like many of the institutions around Drumcondra, are answering new needs.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So Drumcondra is a changing place, and yet you've discovered it's a hidden place, and it's full of, you know, trees and a kind of a rural aspect about it, and we're only a mile and a half or so.
Well, I was just saying to you that between the Drumcondra Road leading out to the airport and Grace Park Road is a wonderful little gem. This is still a great big green lung of an area, and you can imagine in years to come it'll be under pressure to be sold for housing, whenever. We only hope that it never happens.
I don't think it will happen to the land here. They have sold off as much land as they intend to sell off for housing. 2 convents further up Grace Park Road, which used to be called Goose Green Avenue, by the way.
Really?
Indeed. Have been sold for apartments. But things settle down after a while, and I think...